Good afternoon. Welcome to the tea table. I am so happy you have joined me today. We are in the library and we don't have music today because generally in a library you are not going to have any background noise at all and minimal speaking. So I want to welcome you. This is going to be a special presentation of what I consider to be some of the greatest, most inspiring authors of the 20th century. And if you haven't gotten your tea yet, please pause and get your tea, and I'll be waiting for you. Well, I want to show you my tea tray. Now, this is very different. I have on the tea tray today, well, first of all, I have something that I will tell you is what I consider traditional English biscuits. And the British call biscuits what we call cookies. So I'm going to put them down for a moment. And we're going to talk about three special men that all have the first letter C in their name. And so I have chosen, I went and found my three British mugs. Now, usually we would have teacups and saucers, but these are mugs. One is the flag, one is London, different scenes, and one is Queen Elizabeth I. Boy, it's pretty heavy. Let me see if I can hold it. And Sir Walter Raleigh and the different men that were so important to her reign. I'll hold that for you to see. It's very special. And of course, Elizabeth I is Henry VIII's daughter by Anne Boleyn. And then this is London today. And then the British flag. And also on the tea cozy. Well, I thought what the British will say is, let's have a jug of milk. And that is this past Queen Elizabeth II, a commemorative jug for milk or cream, which was from her 25th centennial. She served to be over, my goodness, so long on the throne. She was truly amazing. We miss her, don't we? I know her son Charles is doing his very best, and we need to support him. And it's not easy to become king. I believe he's now turning 75. He's the oldest crowned monarch. And she had the longest reign. There's so many records broken with this immediate family. Well, I want to show you what is, if I can pull this over, this is my British flag tea cozy. And under it, I chose a teapot. This is called a Brown Betty. It is the basic teapot that is in every British home. When I lived in England, everyone had a Brown Betty. And these would sell for quite a reasonable price, even at the corner souvenir shop. And I remember I brought a small one home to my mother, which she used then for several years, many years actually. And then let's get a cup for, it's a little bit difficult, to pour today because I'm in the library. Let's just do 2 cups. And then the three men are Chesterton, Winston Churchill, and C.S. Lewis. Now, I'm giving this cup to Winston Churchill because he represents everything for the last century of freedom. And I want to give this one actually to Chesterton because he loved London so much. And it was very much like the beloved Samuel Johnson we talked about that said, if anyone tires of London, they tire of life. And then let's give C.S. Lewis, because he's such a grand historian and brilliant Oxford scholar, let's give him the Elizabethan cup. Isn't that beautiful? I have these sitting in what I call my, I don't know, I guess I'll pour tea for that one too. Can't leave anyone out. Okay. It's different not having music, but we're having quiet, so I'm going to put the cozy back on. And I love what C.S. Lewis said, and I think I quoted it. I have actually a tea cozy that says it. There's never been a cup big enough for me, or a book long enough to satisfy me. So I gave him a nice size cup. I hope it's big enough. Well, and then please have a cookie or a English biscuit. Put them back over here. Well, let's let I think the cups are so pretty. Let's let the cups display while we have our little tea talk. Well, I want to start with Chesterton. I had not really read a lot of Chesterton. I've always heard of him. People that love Chesterton, absolutely. He has a following that is incredible. And he and Winston Churchill are both born in the 1870s. Winston Churchill lives longer than he because he passes away when he was a very tall man. I believe he was 6'4" and almost weighed 300 pounds. So he was a very big presence. Winston Churchill was a shorter man, but also a very big presence. And I believe C.S. Lewis was average height and build, but not average in his brilliance and gifts. No, very special. Well, these men relate because Chesterton was born into a family. They were Unitarian, but they didn't really have a strong faith. And he grew up rather agnostic or atheist. But when he was in his formative years of university, he was really reading a lot of philosophy. Oh, this tea is fabulous. And this is from my big red can of English tea. It's cold up here in my library today, so I need to have a lot of good tea. Well, Chesterton really found the Lord, and he found Christianity. And he was a poet, he was a journalist, he was a writer, and then he wrote so many books. He wrote, the famous series that Father Brown, that they've made films out of on BBC Masterpiece Theatre. That's his. But the book I want to hold up here is one of his most famous, and it's called The Everlasting Man by Chesterton. And on the back is a little poem that sums up his book. And he had such impact on people that the great C.S. Lewis, who, remember, wrote, the Narnia series, he wrote so much. He gives Chesterton the credit for him coming to faith in Christ. And then C.S. Lewis wrote the famous book, Mere Christianity. Well, this is the little poem that Chesterton wrote. No sign that ever was given to faithful or faithless eyes showed ever beyond clouds riven so clear a paradise. Earth's creeds may be 70 times 7, and blood have defiled each creed. But if such be the kingdom of heaven, it must be heaven indeed. Well, I'm reading this book because my son had read it, and he said, Mom, you would love this book. You would love Chesterton. He's very similar in some ways to C.S. Lewis, but he said, Chesterton is so happy. He's so jolly. He sees everything from a bright side. And I thought, this is so nice. So I'm reading this book. Well, also, Chesterton was known for, he wanders. This is how one writer analyzed the difference between C.S. Lewis and Chesterton. Chesterton is walking slow and ambling, and he, in his work, he describes, he takes time, he's not rushed, he goes on and on about certain things. C.S. Lewis is more direct. And it's interesting because when C.S. Lewis and his brother and a group were taking a walk together, some of the men were just kind of ambling along and slowly walking, but he and his brother, they wanted to get to the top of the hill, so they took off and walked at a very quick pace. And the man writing this analogy said, this is exactly what their writing is like. Isn't that interesting? Well, Churchill, being so close in age to Chesterfield, they definitely knew each other. They both were known for smoking cigars. They both had big personalities. They both, everyone, when they walked in the room, everyone knew they were there. And they were well respected, well regarded, and beautiful hearts. Well, C.S. Lewis, when he read Chesterton, everything came into focus. He had been agnostic. He's a scholar's scholar at Oxford and then later Cambridge. He knew all of the languages. He was into the ancient studies of all the myths and lores and in depth. He's just a true scholar, and he was searching. And when he also, I know C.S. Lewis loved the wonderful Scottish writer and George MacDonald, and he gave George MacDonald a lot of credit for him coming to faith. But Chesterton, his brilliance of explanation of truth just captured his heart. Isn't that beautiful? So these are connected people, everyone. What I wanted to really talk about today was the influence we all have and how important we associate ourselves with people that will be a good influence on us. Now, we live a different life in America than the people did in England. England is an island and everything was connected. London is the center. London is like their Jerusalem. Everyone comes. Everyone can get there by train, by bus. And once you get there, you can move around by the tube. It's public transportation in perfection in England because it had to be, because you can't really drive through London. It's too many cars. So this is why you see the British. We have a very rainy climate here in Washington State, but I rarely use an umbrella because I go from my house to my car, from my car to the store, from my car to the place. So I don't really need an umbrella unless I'm walking the lake or something, but I generally try to walk when it's not raining. But it's not that way in England. When I lived in England, I lived in Croydon, Purley, Surrey, and that's considered the outskirts of London. And so I would get up. I had to be in every day in London. I would walk about a mile to the Croydon train station, get on the train, took about an hour, get off at Victoria Station, and that's considered the Buckingham, it's the Buckingham Palace area, Buckinghamshire. And I would walk about 4 blocks, and I would be at my place of employment. I worked at a Christian historical library and studied 6 Buckingham Gate. It was literally right across from Buckingham Palace. In fact, the guards would come down every day, and the changing of the guard, I would see it. Well, then at lunch, I would go out and I would walk around, and everything is accessible. So you get a lot of good exercise. And so these men, Churchill, and they were living in a much earlier era. There were cars, but not to the extent now. So London wouldn't have been quite as crowded with all I'm sure they had taxis and everything, but not quite like today. And they would have the double-decker buses, and then the tube was developed underground where people could travel. It's called the tube in London. In New York, it's called the subway, but it's the same principle. Actually came from France. And in a big city where it's so hard to travel on the road, it was just a wonderful solution. Yes, wonderful. And so this is what you had. And so people could always meet, even now in England. I believe it takes 10 hours from Edinburgh to London by train, and that's one of the longest trips. I think York to London is probably 5 to 6 hours. That's pretty far north. Everything else is within an hour, hour and a half. You can always get to London. Well, it's not that way in America. Many people have never even been to Washington, D.C., our state, our capital. Many have never been to the battlefields or the famous places even of New York. I mean, a lot of people fly through and fly in and fly out, but they don't really go on tours. And so, but in England, it's different. It's so much smaller. It's an island. And it all goes to the center of London. And then the Thames River comes down. You could actually ride to London on a boat if you could get up where it would begin. So I think what I'm thinking about is influence. And then on another side, when C.S. Lewis was doing his most serious writing, he would meet with a group, and they called themselves the Inklings, Inklings. In other words, Inklings. We all write. And it was a group that would meet weekly in the pub, and they would have lunch or tea or dinner and discuss and read to each other. I know J.R.R. Tolkien was part of that. C.S. Lewis was. Sometimes Ayn Rand was there. His brother was there, and others. And I know that C.S. Lewis, I've read this in many places, he said he could never have done the great writings without having that group, because they reinforced one another. They encouraged one another. They had someone to give their writing to, because no one lives in a vacuum. And I think because we live in, most of my tea talk is in America, but many of you are in other places also. But because we're getting in and out of cars, we can actually end up living rather isolated lives, and that is not good. Now, one way you can have good acquaintance is by reading good books. You can go all around the world in good books. But as I study various people, and realized that I started thinking, you always have clumps of greatness. You know, when you had in the Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci, and then you had Raphael, and then you had Michelangelo, and they would all inspire one another. And then in the scientists, you know, you would have people like Kepler and Copernicus and Newton and Galileo, and they would read each other's things and they would be inspired, and then they would grow bigger. And of course in music it's that way. I mean, you have the Baroque period and the pre-Baroque, where you have that Italian school, and you have, you know, Pachelbel and Corelli and Vivaldi and Scarlatti. They inspire Johann Sebastian Bach. He emerges. And then Haydn and Handel. And then out of that comes Mozart and Beethoven. And then it continues on. Schubert and Schumann and Franz Liszt. They all, it's listening, and then they hear, and then they add something new, and it creates. In England, in the Victorian era, you had the Romantic poets. You had Shelley and Keats and Lord Byron. They were called the School of the Romantics. And I was thinking, even going back to the Greeks, you know, in the Iliad and the Odyssey were written by Homer, and that was 8th century before Christ. And then out of that, the 5th century, you had the sophists coming, the philosophers, the wisdom seekers. Sophic means wisdom. Then you had in 470, Socrates is born. And then in 429, Plato, he teaches Plato. And then in 384, Plato teaches Aristotle. And then 342, Epicurus. But Aristotle teaches, who do you think? Born in 336, Alexander the Great. This is a proof that nothing is born in a vacuum. We need each other. And I think I have a huge Russian shelf right behind me, and I have everyone on there. We have Leo Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, and then you have Pushkin. And these Russian writers are all part of, called the Russian school. They're all inspiring one another, and they write poetry, and then they write novels, and then they write articles, and they write literature, and even songs come out of that, and music will come. The Trojan War, I want to go back, was in 1194, and that was what inspired the Iliad and the Odyssey. And so that's how you have always something there. And that's what I kept feeling like when I was reading about Chesterton. Could he have ever really been quite as great without all of the interaction? C.S. Lewis, his great book that he wrote, Mere Christianity, was actually a collection of lectures that he was asked by the King and BBC. They asked him, would you please give lectures once a week on the radio to bring comfort to the British people? And because they didn't have TV in those days, and the only way of any communication would be radio. Well, he did that, and out of that came that book. And that book has changed so many people's lives. That's the one book I think is just beyond brilliant, how he explains and how he grapples with, and how he's so heartfelt. And I think one of the true signs of greatness to me, when I look at literature or music or art, it's done by people who have looked beyond. They are not living inwardly for themselves. They're living upward and outwardly and they're giving something out. The other group, interestingly enough, was the group in Paris in the 20s, where you had Ernest Hemingway and all of those. I remember hearing his biography. I heard a documentary on Ernest Hemingway, and he said, I never could have written my books if I hadn't been surrounded by so many great minds and hearts and discussion. And artists are very sensitive, and they need encouragement, and they need reflection back. And that's what he was implying. He said this was such a great time to live in Paris. There's that whole little section, by the Seine river there, where they produced so many books and so many ideas. And I thought, let's bring it back to us. What can we do in our little world? We may feel we live in little worlds, but our worlds are very important, and little is much when God is in it. I love that. And what is your passion? Surround yourself with others, and you probably already do. You read and study what you love, but try to find others and have some in-person. I'm thinking it is the in-person communication that is the most powerful. I don't know the exact percentage, but I once saw the analogy or the study that a text is like maybe a 30% communication. And then a phone call, talking on a phone, is maybe like a 50 or 60 communication. But an in-person where you interact and you see the person will use their hand and they will describe and they will look you in the eye. That's 100% communication. And that's very important to have in our lives. That when we speak to people, look them in the eye and take time and listen to what they say and then express back. I think because everything is so fast now, push a button, we're moving fast, and we don't always take time to really greet and really listen. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and everyone needs to be listened to. It's so fun to be up in my library. I hadn't been up here for a while. When I did my degree in church history, I was giving, because it was COVID lockdown, part of my dissertation was giving lectures. And so I did it on YouTube and created a history statement and channel and went through From Christ to Today, 10 lectures on his tree. Well, I was up in this library a lot. So when I came up today, I kept finding things and I thought, I want to come back up here and spend more time. I usually read downstairs, but let me see what I found here. I found a wonderful magazine. Now this magazine, this is called Christian History, and it's still published, and you can find it online, and they send it to you, and it is a fabulous magazine. They will take one section of church history and cover it thoroughly. I save all of them. They're wonderful books. This was one that was done during that time. And then I come up and here, what did I find? I found one of my heroes, Martin Luther. Now he's another example. He couldn't have done the Protestant Reformation alone. He was involved with so many. There was Erasmus in Holland. There was Philip Melanchthon, his assistant. There was Calvin in Geneva. And then John Knox came over from Scotland and went back. And then you had Zwingli in Switzerland. And then you had Farrell in Switzerland. And these men were all communicating back and forth and writing and reading each other's writings and helping each other to grow. Then I found something fun, and this is my Stories of the Pilgrims. It's a children's book, wonderful book. And I love November because this is Pilgrims Month, and we will talk about them. We're going to be talking probably next time. Then I found in here something that I need to take to my desk downstairs, my journal. And I need to write in my journal. Are you writing in your journal? Let's be honest, it's not easy. We're moving too fast in our pace, I think, and I need to write in my journal. Then I find here my Jerusalem Bible made of olive wood. And I got this Bible when I was in Jerusalem. It says Garden Tomb, Jerusalem, March 22nd, 1970, Palm Sunday. That's when I was there. And there's something beautiful here that I think I'll read to you. I copied it down. I haven't read this for years. It says, I believe in the sun when it is not shining. I believe in love when I do not feel it. I believe in God when he is silent. And this was written by an unknown Jewish person scrawled on the wall in one of the concentration camps in Germany during the war. Isn't that beautiful? Then I have another quote in here from my pastor, Buntain. Make sure you're dedicated to something beyond yourself. Let's think about that. Be sure being dedicated to something beyond yourself. I have lots of little notes here I'm going to reread. My penmanship is so perfect in these days. I think as we move faster, our penmanship goes faster, doesn't it? Yes. Oh, here's something that goes with English. The reason the British Isles love the gospel, the English preach about it, the Scottish love it because it's free, the Welsh sing about it, and the Irish fight about it. Oh, isn't that good? Well, I think that also you can think of probably things that have happened in your life where you would not have been able to accomplish a goal without the help of other people. Even planning a big event, you think of all the people who you work together with. Well, that's what art is like. Yes, we work on our own, but we're inspired by others. And there's that era in America and even the music of the late 50s and early 60s and all those groups that were singing, and it's so beautiful. You listen to them, their harmonies are so beautiful. And you think, how were there so many of them? How did they do it? Well, it's the ear hearing and then repeating. Because music is learned through the ear, art is learned through the eye, and love is learned through the heart. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been so special. It's so cozy in my library. I'm going to come back. I have my world. And I think we had a little library talk back to school, and she's still here. My little back to school doll is still here. She has her book, and she has her glasses. She's so sweet. Look at her glasses, darling. And her little black velvet and plaid outfit with her golden curls. She stays right here by the chalkboard. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this little tea talk, and I would highly recommend looking up Chesterton. One thing I do for me that I've done for years, and I kind of thought everyone did it, but I don't know if they do. Before I read a book, I look up the author and I read his bio, and makes the book so much more meaningful. I love to study people. I love the biography of the person that wrote it. Or if there's a work of art, the person that painted it. It's worth doing, and now with our phones and Wikipedia, we can do that. For what I'm wearing today, I'm wearing green and orange touches, and it just feels like the beginning of November. So I pulled out, I still have my same purse. I've been using this all fall, and it's got that bright orange. I call it orange, but really it's more of, it's just a nice tangerine and kind of a deep, with deep tones of red. Beautiful. I love it. And I love green and I love brown. And this kind of has hints of, my scarf has hints of touches of brown. But anyway, that's that. And I hope you have a wonderful week. It's so different not having music. We'll have music next week, but we just can't have it in the library. We would get in trouble. I remember going to the library, and my girlfriends and I, we were always getting told, shh, shh, and it was so hard not to talk. But you could hear a pin drop in the library, and that was very nice for study. Yes. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you get a good book. Go sit by your fire, have tea, get your kitty cat, be cozy, and I will look forward to seeing you next time. God bless. Oh, and if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And I love your comments. Thank you so much for your comments and for your like buttons. I appreciate it. I notice it. Thank you. God bless. Have a fabulous week.